My name is Victoria. I am 34 years old, and I am the head of corporate culture and efficiency at Quantum Creative Solutions, one of the most prominent advertising agencies in the city. My role, as I've always seen it, is to sculpt an optimal environment where talent thrives, processes flow seamlessly, and results are not just achieved, but surpassed. I don't believe in chaos. I believe in systems. The world, to me, is not a capricious, organic mess, but a complex, yet ultimately manageable machine. And I, with my meticulously researched theories and unwavering adherence to what is demonstrably correct, am its most skilled architect. For years, I had observed the subtle inefficiencies that plagued even the most successful enterprises. One such inefficiency, often dismissed as trivial, was the antiquated notion of a rigid dress code. Quantum, for all its progressive campaigns and cutting-edge digital strategies, still clung to a business-casual mandate that felt more like a relic from a bygone era. Men were expected to wear collared shirts, women tailored blouses. Ties, while not mandatory, were encouraged for client meetings. It struck me as profoundly counterproductive. How could we expect our creatives to innovate, to break boundaries, if they were shackled by uncomfortable fabrics and arbitrary sartorial conventions? My desk was laden with studies, academic papers detailing the psychological benefits of comfort, the correlation between autonomy and creativity, the rise of flexible workplaces where employee well-being was paramount. The evidence was irrefutable. I approached the executive board, my presentation meticulously prepared. Slides transitioned seamlessly, filled with compelling data points, industry trends, and projections of increased morale and productivity. I argued that a relaxed dress code wasn't just about comfort, it was a statement. It would signal to our employees that we trusted them, respected their judgment, and valued their contribution over their outward appearance. It would dismantle a toxic corporate norm that historically judged women more harshly than men for their attire, while simultaneously liberating men from the stifling expectation of conformity. We weren't just an agency, we were a movement. We would lead the charge in fostering an environment of true progressive enlightenment, where creativity was unfettered by superficial concerns. There was initial resistance, of course, mostly from the older guard, the traditionalists, as I privately labeled them. Mr. Thorne, our CEO, a man of quiet authority, raised an eyebrow when I suggested allowing shorts. Victoria, he said, his voice measured, there's a certain gravitas we need to maintain, especially with our high-profile clients. I countered with examples of Silicon Valley giants, whose casual attire often belied their multi-billion-dollar empires. Gravitas, I asserted, comes from competence and confidence, not from a starched collar. We are hiring the best minds, Mr. Thorne. Do we truly believe their genius is constrained by the presence of a denim jacket? My arguments, buttressed by empirical data and framed in the language of progress and employee empowerment, were ultimately persuasive. The board, keen to project a modern image, approved my Flex Attire initiative. The memo went out agency-wide. Effective immediately, Quantum Creative Solutions is embracing a progressive approach to workplace attire. We believe that comfort and personal expression foster creativity and enhance well-being. Employees are encouraged to dress in a manner that reflects their individuality while maintaining professionalism appropriate for their daily tasks. It was a triumph. My inbox immediately filled with appreciative emails from younger employees. The buzz in the office shifted, a noticeable lightness in the air. I walked through the open-plan offices, observing the transformation with a quiet satisfaction. Employees looked genuinely happier, more relaxed. Some wore stylish athleisure, others well-fitting jeans and graphic tees. The stiff formality melted away, replaced by an authentic, vibrant energy. This, I thought, was true progress. This was what happened when you applied sound theory to real-world problems instead of clinging to outdated conventions. I had solved a problem that others hadn't even realized existed, and I had done it by pushing boundaries, by thinking beyond the conventional. I felt a surge of validation, the quiet hum of a perfectly executed plan. My world was orderly, predictable, and I was at its helm, guiding it toward an enlightened future. The initial weeks were exhilarating. The office felt more vibrant, less like a sterile corporate environment and more like a dynamic creative hub. Designers wore vintage band t-shirts and stylish sneakers, copywriters sported comfortable hoodies, and account managers, freed from the tyranny of blazers, opted for smart cardigans over tailored jackets. The mood was palpably lighter, conversations flowed more freely, and even the usually reserved finance team seemed to shed some of their rigid formality. I saw colleagues laughing more, interacting across dements, and the hum of productivity, I believed, was now interwoven with a thread of genuine contentment. This was the progressive education I had envisioned, the employee health I had championed. My theory was proving itself in practice, despite the initial skepticism of those who mistook traditionalism for professionalism. They simply didn't understand the modern paradigm, the delicate balance between autonomy and accountability that I, through careful research and meticulous planning, had so perfectly orchestrated. However, as the weeks bled into months, a subtle shift began to occur. The individuality I had encouraged started to lean a little too heavily into outright casualness. First, it was the occasional pair of flip-flops on a particularly warm day, then the increasingly frayed jeans, the slightly too stained t-shirts. The smart athleisure morphed into full-blown gym wear, complete with sweatpants and oversized hoodies that looked like they'd been slept in. The creative team, perhaps interpreting unfettered by superficial concerns a little too literally, began to push the boundaries further. One morning, I spotted a graphic designer, a brilliant young woman named Chloe, walking past my office in what appeared to be pajamas, albeit stylish, silk-blend pajamas, but pajamas nonetheless. My brow furrowed almost imperceptibly. This wasn't quite what I had envisioned. I told myself it was merely an adjustment. People were testing the limits, and it was my role to guide them gently back towards the ideal. I issued a follow-up internal memo, framed with a positive spin, of course. To further support our Flexitire initiative, we encourage everyone to remember the spirit of professionalism that underpins our work. While comfort is paramount, we also represent a leading agency, and our appearance should reflect the excellence and sophistication we bring to our clients. We trust each of you to exercise good judgment, particularly in client-facing scenarios. It was a subtle nudge, a gentle reminder that my vision of comfort was not synonymous with sloppiness. It was a call to elevate their discernment, to meet my high standards. But the memo seemed to vanish into the ether of ignored corporate communications. The problem wasn't just aesthetic, it was beginning to permeate the very fabric of our working environment. The relaxed attitude, born from a lack of formal expectations, started to erode the boundaries between work and leisure. Deadlines, once sacrosanct, began to stretch. Presentations, once polished to a brilliant sheen, became slightly less rigorous. There was an increase in impromptu, boisterous conversations around the coffee machine that often bled into work hours, disrupting concentration. I observed a distinct lack of edge in internal meetings. Ideas, while still creative, sometimes lacked the intellectual sharpness, the professional gravitas that had once defined Quantum. People seemed a little too comfortable, a little too at ease. The system I had so carefully constructed, designed to optimize, was beginning to show cracks, not because my theory was flawed, but because the human element proved recalcitrant. They were taking advantage of my generosity, my progressive vision, and twisting it into an excuse for complacency. They were proving my critics right. It was frustrating, a betrayal of the trust one had placed in their judgment. I started to hear hushed complaints from some of the more seasoned account managers. "Victoria, I had a prospective client in yesterday, and one of our designers walked past in gym shorts and a tank top," remarked Marcus, a veteran with 2 decades in the industry. "It just doesn't project the right image. It makes us look unserious." I dismissed his concerns as old-fashioned. "Marcus, our work speaks for itself. True clients value substance over superficiality. And besides, isn't it wonderful that our designers feel comfortable enough to be their authentic selves?" I knew deep down I was being defensive. My internal framework, which dictated that my theories were always correct and reality merely needed to align, was under strain. I couldn't admit my policy was creating a problem, because that would imply I had erred. And I, Victoria, did not err. It was their failure to correctly interpret my enlightened policy. They lacked the maturity, the self-discipline, to truly grasp the freedom I had bestowed upon them. They were like children given a sophisticated tool and using it to dig in the dirt. The subtle acts of bureaucratic violence began. I initiated a series of voluntary workshops on personal branding in a flexible workplace, which were thinly veiled attempts to re-educate employees on appropriate attire without rescinding the policy. I implemented a new client meeting protocol document outlining best practices for presentations, including a clause about projecting professional confidence through all visual aspects. It was all process-oriented, all designed to control behavior without resorting to outright bans. But these measures, like my memo, were met with polite indifference. The casual slide continued, a slow, insistent erosion of the professional standards I had always upheld. I felt a growing sense of frustration, a quiet anger that simmered beneath my composed exterior. My world, my carefully managed system, was beginning to feel less like a well-oiled machine and more like a tangled mess of unruly threads. Then came the call from Vanguard Innovations. They were a titan in the tech sector, looking for an agency to completely revamp their global marketing strategy. It was a bid worth millions, a prestigious account that could redefine Quantum's standing in the industry. The stakes were astronomically high. Our team had worked tirelessly for weeks, crafting an intricate, visionary proposal. I personally oversaw the final presentation, ensuring every slide, every word, every projection was flawless. This was our chance to prove not just our creative prowess, but our strategic acumen, our unwavering professionalism. The pitch team was formidable. Sarah, our brilliant creative director, David, the lead strategist, and Alex, a sharp, quick-witted account executive who had developed an excellent rapport with Vanguard's junior team during the preliminary stages. Alex was young, talented, and embodied the new, relaxed vibe of the agency. He was charismatic, but also, I'd noticed, prone to pushing boundaries. I had reminded him, subtly but firmly, about the importance of sartorial discretion for such a critical meeting. He had nodded, assuring me he understood. My internal monologue, however, was already whispering warnings. His interpretation of professionalism sometimes differed from mine. On the day of the pitch, I arrived at Vanguard's sleek, minimalist headquarters an hour early, as was my habit, to ensure everything was set up perfectly. The conference room, with its panoramic city views, was ideal. I mentally reviewed the presentation, feeling a surge of confident anticipation. This was it. This was where Quantum would truly shine. The Vanguard team began to arrive, their CEO, Ms. Harding, a formidable woman with an intimidatingly sharp gaze, their head of global marketing, Mr. Chin, known for his meticulous attention to detail, and several other senior executives, all impeccably dressed in dark, tailored suits. They exuded an aura of understated power, of serious business. My team walked in moments later. Sarah looked elegant in a tailored pantsuit. David was smart in a crisp shirt and blazer. And then Alex stepped in. My breath caught in my throat. He was wearing shorts. Not tailored, smart shorts that one might conceivably wear in a casual business environment, but cargo shorts. Khaki cargo shorts, replete with visible pockets, paired with a slightly rumpled polo shirt and, to my absolute horror, brightly colored sneakers. It was an outfit one might wear to a weekend barbecue, or perhaps a casual stroll in a park, but certainly not to a multi-million-dollar pitch with one of the most conservative tech companies in the world. My eyes darted to Ms. Harding. Her poker face barely flickered, but I saw a fractional stiffening around her jawline. Mr. Chen's gaze, as it swept over Alex, lingered for a fraction of a second longer than necessary, his brow furrowed almost imperceptibly. A palpable shift in the atmosphere occurred. The initial warmth, the polite smiles, seemed to subtly cool. Alex, utterly oblivious to the social gaffe, offered a charming, confident smile, shaking hands with the Vanguard executives as if he were dressed in a bespoke suit. My internal alarm bells were screaming. This was it. This was the moment my carefully constructed system, my progressive ideology, would collide with the unforgiving reality of the corporate world. And it was Alex, the embodiment of the freedom I had championed, who was holding the wrecking ball. The pitch began. Sarah and David presented flawlessly, their arguments sharp, their visuals stunning. But every time Alex spoke, every time he gestured, every time the khaki cargo shorts came into view, I felt a visceral cringe. His words, though articulate and insightful, seemed to lose their weight. His youthful enthusiasm, which normally would have been an asset, now felt somehow disrespectful. The incongruity between his casual appearance and the gravity of the subject matter was glaring. It was like trying to discuss quantum physics while wearing clown shoes. MS. Harding and Mr. Chin asked incisive questions, their expressions unreadable. I tried to inject an extra layer of professionalism into my own contributions, my voice precise, my posture rigid, as if to compensate for the visual discord. I felt a desperate need to assert control over the narrative, to somehow mitigate the damage Alex was unknowingly inflicting. But it was too late. The thread, once unraveling, had now snapped. 2 days later, the email arrived. It was polite, professional, and devastatingly clear. Vanguard Innovations appreciated our proposal, but had decided to proceed with another agency. The phrasing was vague, a better strategic alignment, a slightly different vision. But the subtext was screaming. I knew, with an agonizing certainty, that Alex's cargo shorts had been the nail in our coffin. It wasn't just about the clothing, it was what the clothing represented. It represented a perceived lack of seriousness, a casual disregard for their expectations, an agency that, despite its talent, couldn't even manage its own internal professionalism. Mr. Thorne called me into his office the moment he received the news. He sat behind his large mahogany desk, his expression grim. Victoria, he said, his voice devoid of its usual calm, we lost Vanguard. Millions. A reputation booster that would have put us miles ahead. He leaned forward, placing his hands on the desk. They didn't say it explicitly, of course. Corporations never do. But a contact at Vanguard mentioned concerns about our agency's corporate culture and attention to detail. You understand what that means, don't you? I stared at him, the meticulously crafted edifice of my theories crumbling around me. My progressive vision, my championing of comfort and autonomy, had led directly to this catastrophic loss. It wasn't the employees who had failed to understand my enlightened policy, it was my policy itself that had failed. My control, marketed as goodness, had backfired spectacularly, turning into a weapon against the very institution I sought to optimize. The reality I had so readily dismissed, the traditionalists I had scorned, had been right all along. They saw a deeper truth, a nuanced understanding of human perception and expectation that my academic papers and ideological frameworks had completely overlooked. The anger and humiliation were incandescent. My face, I knew, remained impassive, but inside, a storm raged. How dare they? How dare they betray my trust, take my enlightened policies and twist them into an excuse for such profound sloppiness? It was their lack of judgment, their inability to understand the true meaning of professional comfort that had cost us everything. It wasn't my theory that was flawed, it was their execution of it. They were the ignorant ones, the victims of their own poor taste, and I had been far too lenient in my attempts to educate them. The next morning, an agency-wide email landed in every quantum inbox. It was not gentle. It was not suggestive. It was a decree. Effective immediately, Quantum Creative Solutions is reinstating a mandatory business professional dress code. All employees are required to adhere to the following guidelines: tailored suits or professional dresses/skirts for women, collared shirts, ties, and blazers for men. Denim, shorts, athleisure wear, and open-toed shoes are strictly prohibited for all employees at all times within the office premises. These standards will be rigorously enforced, with disciplinary action taken for noncompliance. Our reputation, and thus our future, depends on upholding the highest standards of professionalism in every aspect of our work. The atmosphere in the office shifted instantly. The vibrant energy, the relaxed chatter, the sense of camaraderie. It all evaporated, replaced by a chilling silence. Doors that had once been open were now closed. Smiles were replaced by tight-lipped expressions. The air, once light with creative possibility, became heavy with resentment. My inbox, which had once overflowed with messages of appreciation for the Flexitire initiative, now remained starkly, ominously empty. I walked through the agency, surveying the newly uniformed landscape. Employees, now encased in their formal attire, looked stiff, uncomfortable, their shoulders slumped. The casual rebellion had been swiftly and decisively crushed, replaced by a sullen, enforced conformity. I saw furtive glances, whispered conversations that ceased abruptly when I approached. The creative spark, the sense of joyful expression that had briefly flourished, was extinguished. The office was professional again, but it was also lifeless. The agency suffered. Morale plummeted. Some of our best young talent, those who had thrived under the illusion of creative freedom, quietly tendered their resignations. They sought agencies that truly embraced the progressive ideals I had once only pretended to. The innovative campaigns became less daring, the presentations less inspired. We were safe, we were professional, but we were no longer quantum. We were just another corporate entity, indistinguishable from the multitude. My success felt hollow, a bitter ash in my mouth. I had regained control, yes, but at what cost? The agency, my carefully managed system, now operated with the efficiency of a finely tuned machine, but it was a machine devoid of soul, fueled by obligation rather than inspiration. I was still Victoria, head of corporate culture and efficiency, my career trajectory unblemished, my financial independence absolute. But I was also isolated, surrounded by a workforce that saw me not as a leader, but as a punitive overseer. The hyper-independence I had cultivated as a shield against vulnerability now felt like a cold, impenetrable wall, separating me from any genuine human connection. I had won the battle for control, but in doing so, I had lost the war for relevance and, perhaps, off myself. Sometimes, late at night, I would browse the social media profiles of former colleagues who had left Quantum. I'd see photos of them thriving in other, less rigid environments, their faces alight with genuine joy, their workspaces vibrant and collaborative. I'd see pictures of Alex, who had found a new role at a competing agency, flourishing, his creative ideas flowing freely, his attire, a perfectly acceptable smart casual, reflecting a balanced understanding of professionalism and individuality that I had so spectacularly failed to cultivate. And then I would look at my own meticulously organized, yet utterly sterile life. My perfectly appointed aimant, my impressive career, my complete and utter independence. All the markers of success according to my own stringent theories. Yet a chill wind seemed to whistle through the empty spaces in my life. The warmth, the spontaneity, the messy, unpredictable joy of true human connection. These were the organic elements my system had systematically purged. I had achieved my objective, absolute control. But the price was a profound, suffocating loneliness. I had built a perfectly managed world and in doing so, had constructed a gilded cage around myself, unable to bridge the gap between my flawless theories and the messy, vibrant, sometimes short-swearing reality of human beings.